Hey, deep divers. You ready to go deep on this one? Because, wow, you sent us this paper on national conservatism.
National conservatism.
Yeah, and we're going to be calling it NatCon because, frankly, it's just easier.
Makes sense to me.
So this deep dive is going to be fascinating. Um, First off, what makes this paper so interesting is that it's from a French institute.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's like getting a peek into how the rest of the world sees this movement, this NatCon movement that's gaining traction here in America. And the question this paper really wrestles with is how a movement that calls itself nationalist, right, what impact it's going to have on how America interacts with the rest of the world.
That's the big question, isn't it?
That-
Because it's not immediately clear when you hear the word nationalist. You might think isolationist, but it's a lot more complicated than that.
It's way more complicated than that. So we're going to unpack it, and we're going to start with the fact that NatCons are on the rise, especially in the Republican Party.
It seems like it, yeah.
They've gone from this kind of fringe group to a real potential power player.
Yeah, you can see that.
Especially, heading into 2024.
Big year.
Big year. And in fact, you could even say that Ron DeSantis' name has been thrown around as a potential standard bearer.
Interesting.
But is he really a NatCon? That's something that I think we are going to unpack as we go.
Yeah, I'm interested in that.
But to really understand the NatCon vision, we need to kind of rewind a little bit. Back to 2016, back to Trump's victory.
Because that was a really pivotal moment.
It really was a pivotal moment. And it wasn't just about one man winning the office, was it?
No. It really upended a lot of the Republican Party's traditional stances on things like economics and foreign policy. And that's what the NatCons really saw as this opportunity to kind of redefine conservatism in America.
To redefine it.
Yeah.
And one of the central figures in all of this, in this redefinition, is a guy named Yoram Hazony. Have you heard of him?
I have, yeah.
He wrote a book called The Virtue of Nationalism.
Yeah, the virtue of nationalism kind of lays out their, it's kind of their Bible in a way.
It's their Bible.
Yeah.
And his big idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that he argues that a world of strong, independent nations is actually more stable and more peaceful.
Yeah, it's an interesting argument, and I think it's one that's resonating with people.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think twice about what nationalism even means, because it's not just about building walls and, keeping everyone out.
Right, exactly. It's a much more nuanced view than that.
It's a much more nuanced view. So let's break down those core beliefs, because the paper does a really good job of laying out what they believe, and they break it down into three main tenets of NatCon ideology.
Okay, let's hear it.
Religion, economics, and global power. And they get very specific about all three of these things.
They do.
Starting with religion. NatCons believe that Christianity is the bedrock of American identity and that traditional values are under attack. The paper even goes so far as to draw comparisons to what's happening in Hungary with Viktor Orban's illiberal democracy.
Wow, that's a really interesting comparison.
It is a really interesting comparison. For those of us who are not, up on our Eastern European politics, what exactly does illiberal democracy mean, and what does it have to do with NatCons?
Well, I mean, essentially, it's a system where, yes, you can vote, but individual rights and freedoms are restricted. And it's often done in the name of national unity or traditional values.
So you can vote,
But the government has a lot of control over the media, over the courts, even over what people are allowed to say.
So the NatCons are seeing something similar happening here.
That's how they see it. They see it as a shift away from individual liberties and toward a more, I guess you could say, traditional way of life.
Okay, so we're seeing a strong stance on religion, a connection to some, let's just say, controversial figures on the world stage. But what about their economic policies? Because that's where things get really interesting, I think.
I think so, too, because they have a very distinct view on that.
They do.
So the NatCons, they are very skeptical of what they call neoliberal globalization, which is, basically the free trade agreements, outsourcing, all of that.
Yeah.
They believe that these policies have really hurt American workers and that it's undermined the country's, our national sovereignty. So they want to bring back protectionism, focus on American jobs, even revive things like industrial policy, where the government takes a more active role in supporting specific industries.
So they are not fans of the free trade deals that we've seen in the last, several decades.
No, not at all, because they see it as a race to the bottom in a lot of ways.
So wait a minute. So isn't that kind of what Biden has been doing with this whole Buy American push?
It is interesting that there is some overlap between what we would consider to be, NatCon economic policies in what we're seeing from the Biden administration.
So it's not as clear-cut as it used to be, these lines.
Exactly. The lines are getting a lot blurrier.
So we're seeing these interesting stances on religion, on economics, and of course we have to talk about foreign policy.
Yeah.
Because that's really where this whole nationalism thing comes into play.
Right. Right, because that's where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they believe in a strong America. They really do. But they're also very wary of America trying to play this role of, like, global policeman.
Right, that whole America First thing is really central to their platform.
Absolutely. They're tired of these, what they see as these endless wars in the Middle East. They're very skeptical of these big international institutions like the UN.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very critical of the kind of interventionism that, frankly, neoconservatives have really championed for the last several decades.
So less involvement overseas. I mean, that's got to be a pretty easy sell to a lot of Americans, especially after Iraq, Afghanistan.
Yeah, there's definitely a weariness kind of across the political spectrum when it comes to, foreign entanglements.
Yeah, for sure.
And the NatCons have really tapped into that, but it's not as simple as just, like, pulling back entirely.
So they don't want to become isolationists, right?
Exactly.
There's more to it than that.
Way more to it. There's actually two main camps, kind of emerging within the NatCon movement about how far this America First philosophy should really go.
So, what are these two camps? How do they break down?
So one camp is laser focused on China. They see China as the biggest threat, really, to America's global standing. I think you could almost call him like the Tucker Carlson camp.
Yeah.
Because he's been so influential in pushing that.
He's been very vocal about China.
Exactly. And they really see China as kind of the big bad wolf. And they argue that in order to counter them, we need to stop pouring all these resources into places like the Middle East. Some of them even question our support for Taiwan, saying it could drag us into an unnecessary war.
So they're saying basically pull back almost everywhere to build up, Fortress America, to take on China.
Exactly. Now, the other camp, I guess you could call them like the strategic allies camp, has a slightly more nuanced view. They agree that, we need to avoid direct military intervention, but they do believe the U.S. should be actively supporting allies, like Japan, South Korea, even, get this, Ukraine.
Wait, hold on. Ukraine? How does that square with America First? I thought the whole point was to avoid these foreign conflicts.
Right, and it definitely creates tension. But their argument is that, look, a strong, independent Ukraine helps to contain Russia, which they still see as a threat, even if China is the main focus.
Right.
So they're thinking a little more strategically about, maintaining a balance of power.
So you've got these two camps, both calling themselves NatCons, both really wary of this global interventionism, but very different approaches to how they view China, Russia, how they would play the, geopolitical chess game. It's almost like they're not sure if they want to flip the board or, play a very strategic game.
Yeah, and that's what happens with the movement, this early in its evolution.
Right.
Where a lot of this foreign policy thinking is still being, hashed out, debated.
Which kind of leads to the million-dollar question. Ron DeSantis. He shows up at that NatCon conference in 2022, smiling for the cameras, creating all this buzz. What do you make of that? Is he their guy? Where does he fit into all this?
I think that's the question a lot of people have. And I think, to be honest, his foreign policy positions, they're still a little bit of a mystery.
He's been a little vague on the details.
Yeah, he hasn't really had to, define them in the same way as if he were, say, running for president, where you have to lay it all out.
Right.
But
he's running Florida. I mean, But we have to have some clues, right?
We do. And I think we can glean some clues from his actions as governor.
But he's given us some hints. So, what do we make of all this?
Well, I mean, he's taken a hard line against, regimes in Latin America, Cuba, Venezuela.
Right, that makes sense. Huge Cuban-American population in Florida. You got to appeal to your base.
Exactly. He's also been a very staunch supporter of Israel, going so far as to pledge to be the most pro-Israel governor in America when he was campaigning.
So kind of leaning into some of those more traditional Republican stances there.
For sure.
But he's also got this, Ivy League background, right? Yale, Harvard Law feels very different from, a Trump, for instance. Does that tell us anything? Does that give us any clues about, maybe how he would govern, how closely he would align with some of these NatCon ideas?
Right. Is he really one of them? Or is he, as some critics suggest, a more kind of, buttoned up version of the same kind of populism?
Right. Is it all just kind of, strategy?
Exactly. And I think that's what remains to be seen.
Okay. So, big picture then. We've talked about, the origins of the NatCon movement. We've talked about some of the key players, the impact it's having on the Republican Party. But you might be listening to this and thinking, what does this mean for, what does this mean for me? Why does any of this
And
matter?
that's always the question, right?
Yeah.
But I think this is about more than just politics. It's about a shift in how Americans see themselves and their role in the world. I think it reflects a real exhaustion with what a lot of people see as, forever wars and the cost, both in terms of, lives and in terms of money that those have had.
Right. You don't have to be a member of any particular party to feel that way.
Exactly. This is something that crosses, the traditional ideological lines.
Yeah, it's a gut feeling.
It really is. And I think that's why this is so significant. It's about something much deeper than just sort of who's up, who's down in Washington.
This is about like, are we gonna, are we gonna be the world's policeman?
Exactly.
Or are we gonna try something
And
different?
how are we going to interact with other countries if we're not? I mean, what does that look like? And this paper actually ends on a really fascinating point about this.
Okay.
Because they argue that, the NatCon movement, even with its kind of inward focus, it could actually strengthen ties with some of America's traditional allies.
Really?
Yeah, particularly those with right-leaning governments. Because the thinking is a less interventionist America, one that's not so focused on, spreading democracy around the world, that might actually be a more reliable partner for countries that, share its interest.
So less about being the world's policeman and more about kind of strategic alliances with countries that kind of, sing from the same hymnal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's a very different approach. And whether or not it leads to a more stable world, I think that's still very much up for debate.
Yeah, there are no easy answers to these questions.
There really aren't.
But I think what this paper does and what we've tried to do today is really just kind of lay out the different, lay out this new landscape.
Give you the lay of the land.
Give you the lay of the land exactly with NatCon. It's this new kind of, force in American politics. What does it mean? How does it affect our relationships with the rest of the world? I think we're just starting to figure that out.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch it play out.
Well, deep divers, there you have it, another deep dive in the books. We explored the NatCon movement from all angles, the history, the players, those core beliefs, and yeah, that impact it's having on the world stage. But you know us, this is just the beginning, right? Keep those questions coming, keep digging deeper, keep exploring, keep the conversation going. Until next time, deep divers.